This is Guitar Business Radio, the podcast for the business of guitar. No reviews, no demos, no idle chatter, just useful dialogue and information to help you get the most out of your guitar-related business. Whether you're a guitar builder or a guitar player or just something in between, this is for you. Now, here's your host. Oh, wait, it's me, Jeffrey D. Brown. So let's get to it. Well, we made it to episode 2. That's a good thing. There will be many more, I can assure you. In fact, we're already in production on episode 3, and you can generally look forward to the show coming out on Mondays. At least that's the plan at the moment. Feels like a pretty good schedule. Remember, you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts or Google Play Music, and as we have more availability on other platforms, we'll be letting you know about that. If you like what we're doing and you want to stay on top of the evolution, that's an easy way to do it. But in any case, you can always find new episodes and information on the show at our website at guitarbusinessradio.com. Also, another quick reminder, you can also follow us, find us on Facebook and Twitter at Guitar Business on both platforms, at Guitar Business. So episode 1 with our interview of guitar builder Mark Lacey seems to have been well received generally, considering the newness of the show with just one episode and a trailer. We've had a few people chime in with comments here and there, and I suspect that will pick up as we get further down the road. As you've heard me say, we're actively encouraging folks to speak up and be heard. And again, we encourage you to visit our section on the website called Participate. There's a lot of options there. We want to hear from you. Now, I wanted to mention a couple of the comments in particular because I think in combination they really illustrate a good point about what we're doing. These come from the website. Hans writes, actually, only at the end a few minutes were about business today. The rest was actually all about Mark Lacey, which is okay, but not really about business. Cheers. Well, thanks for the cheerful comment, Hans. Appreciate that. But in response, Mike writes, great interview with Mark. I actually thought there was a great deal of business information included in the interview. For example, talking about the creative aspects of going to a museum and taking photos to garner ideas, etc. I think all can learn something from everybody. Great show. Well, thanks to both of you guys. These are both great comments, and it demonstrates how we all hear and see the same things differently. But in Mike's response, he makes a really good point that I hadn't actually thought of until he mentioned it. But the idea of going to a museum, in this case with Mark, to see an exhibition of classic cars and then taking pictures and using those as inspiration for designing several guitars, that's a valuable idea in its own right, but it can certainly spawn a variety of similar methods for doing creative development. So the takeaway on that is listen carefully to the interviews and re-listen if you have to in order to glean the most value from them. And speaking of interviews, we'll be talking today with a guy whose name is, among other things, synonymous with finishing. And that's, of course, Pat Wilkins in LA. And that's coming up in just a few moments. But first, there's this. Well, now it's time for Questionable Moments. This is the segment where we bring up relevant questions of interest to our listeners, bat them around a bit, and see what kind of answers we can come up with. There's no rules that we know of. If it looks like we need rules, then we'll make some up as we go. But for now, no rules. So in episode 1, we brought up the following question. Do you think there's a bubble in the guitar business? We also put it out there on our social media pages where it generated quite a variety of inconsistent responses, some of which I have to admit were completely incoherent. I'm not being judgmental. It's just that they didn't make a lot of sense to me. But there were definitely some interesting comments. One person suggested that the bubble already burst in 2009 as we were free-falling into recession. He said the primary effect was a severe drop in the prices of vintage guitars. If this is true, I'd like to see any information to support that idea, if anybody has any. Totally open to that. There was also the expected discussion of the so-called impending doom lurking with some of the big icon companies of the guitar world. You know who I'm referring to. I'm not going to get into the weeds of that just yet, but my own feeling is that these brands are not going anywhere anytime soon. But as I've said, as many others have too as well, change is certain, and I think we'll see some big changes over the next year, so stay tuned. Now, for some additional perspective on this same issue, I will be asking Pat Wilkins about it during our upcoming interview in a few moments, so stay tuned for that. Now on to this week's new question that we'll be putting out there, and this really has a much more positive ring to it, and that is, where are the guitar-related opportunities? It's a wide question. It goes across the board. I'm not going to try to narrow it, but essentially from your vantage point, where are the potential opportunities for growth and success in business, employment, professional work, etc., anything related to guitar? Let us know what you think. On our website at guitarbusinessradio.com, click participate. On Facebook or Twitter at Guitar Business, #Guitar Opportunities. Now for something completely different. Well, Pat Wilkins has been a leader in the high-end custom finishing market for literally decades. During that time, he's put extraordinary finishes on tens of thousands of instruments. That's most likely what he's best known for. But wait, there's more. You may not know it, but he's been building his own line of basses and guitars for years. And we'll hear more about that as Pat Wilkins joins us today. Well, Pat, thanks for coming on the show with us today. It's great to have you.
I'm glad to be here, Jeff.
Good. Well, let's kind of get started in something that, for those listeners few that may not have heard of Pat Wilkins, maybe you can give us a little information about how you got started in the business and how you created a foundation upon which you would build your business down the road.
Well, pretty much when I moved out to California, I came out here to be a working musician. And along the way, I ran into a few people who were working in the music industry and musical instrument industry. And I was offered a job at Schecter Guitars. So my first real entry point into this industry was through Schecter Guitars. It's something that I cherish highly because it was a great place to start. Taught me a lot of great fundamentals, and it taught me a lot about quality and preciseness and doing my best. It was a great crew to work with, a great shop to work in.
So it gave you a good send off into the business. What was the thing that kind of kicked you on into the next phase of it?
Well, Schecter unfortunately went out of business, and I was left with a skill that I really actually enjoyed doing, and I didn't want to drop out. Music really wasn't in the cards at this point anymore, so I headed off on my own. I started with a couple of $1,000s. I put in a paint booth. I rented a unit in Canoga Park, and I set myself up to do work for musicians, instrument players. And I was fortunate enough to get started with an old former colleague from Schecter. That was Tom Anderson. He was building guitars. He didn't want to paint guitars, so he contacted me, and I started painting guitars for Tom Anderson. And he told other people when they asked, and pretty much the business spread by word of mouth.
So that's the thing you really want. You don't have to spend a lot of money to go out there and promote it. That's what we all strive for in many respects. And I think social media certainly has reinvented that process. So let's talk a little bit about your business. In talking to you in the past, it certainly seems like the core of your business has always been related to finishing in one fashion or another, and still is, even though you have been building your bass and guitar models for some time. I want to talk about the instruments separately, but can you speak to us about the state of the finishing business and what that means going forward? Also in terms of the differences between what you do and what's done internally within companies as well.
Well,
I know that's a lot, but I'm going to give you the floor and you should take a shot at it.
Well, initially, when I started my finishing business, there really wasn't anyone else that I know of that was providing finishing services to small luthier shops or small manufacturers. And so I became kind of a business-to-business subcontractor for guys who made guitars. I also was a refinisher for a lot of the artists here in the Los Angeles business area. I was a refinisher for a lot of artists in the Los Angeles area.
Do you have any names to drop there? I mean, every once in a while we like to hear a few celebrity names because I know you've worked on a lot of them.
Well, I mean, to name a few, I would go with guys like Guns N' Roses and Poison and it's been so long. Pretty much you name almost any hair metal band that came out of Los Angeles, and I've had my hands on their instruments at one time or another. I was involved in the famous Zakk Wylde Bullseye guitar.
Oh, sure. We remember that. Yeah.
I did Eddie Van Halen's Red Cloud Ripley guitar. Boy, there's just so many out there.
I understand how that goes because when I was at the NAMM show a few weeks back and, was talking a little bit about the PR business and people were asking me, well, tell me some of your clients. And, I kind of stumble a little bit, and you're right. The ones that are front of mind come right up, and even though there's tons, they just seem to escape. But I know for a fact that you've been working, with a lot of top name folks for many years. Anyway, so I'll let you continue on. But I am interested in the differences between external finishing operations like yours, and you're kind of in a unique position, and then maybe how it's done internally. Is there any comparison?
Well, I've done a lot of consulting for bigger companies, Fender, Ernie Ball, ESP. I've done a lot of consulting for companies that are large and that do their own in-house finishing. We're all pretty much using the same thing these days. The small boutique companies that still use nitrocellulose lacquer, they're on a different level and a different approach than I am. I'm pretty much a production finisher. I do volume. And the large businesses will also do volume, and that's why they came to me. There was a switch, especially in California, where the EPA laws changed from nitrocellulose lacquer to anything that wasn't nitrocellulose. And I was already using a lot of synthetics by then, so they came to me and asked me to help them set up their facility. So I guess what I'm trying to say is there's not that much difference from what I do compared to what the larger companies are doing, except for perhaps volume.
Right. Is there a couple of just quick related questions? Is there any, innovation on the horizon in finishing, and are you dealing with any regulatory issues that have popped up from time to time?
Back in 1985, I believe it was when the laws out here in California got real strict. And that was when nitrocellulose lacquer became outlawed, and they allowed for 2 years for people to switch over. I switched immediately, and so that was, in a way, the first innovation. We all had to figure out what we were doing quickly with material that was completely different than what we were using before. Fortunately, I wasn't afraid to break a few rules here and there, not legal rules, but rules of chemistry, and I combined different materials together. Manufacturers of the paints told me, no, you can't do that, you shouldn't do that. And I said, well, let me try anyway. And so I just went ahead and found that even though the manufacturer said you couldn't do it, you actually, in fact, could do certain things. And one of those things was you could combine polyurethanes and polyesters together, which is kind of what I'm doing now. And it's what most companies are doing today. They are combining urethane colors and sealers with polyester sealers and top coats. And it's, we've all shared our processes as much as possible. We all keep certain things close to the vest. But for the most part, we're pretty open because it's a small industry. Even though it seems like it may be large, it's a small industry, and we all know each other, and we all help each other as much as possible.
Well, that's a great perspective. Let's shift gears just a little bit, because you've told me that you'd ultimately like to devote more of your time to building instruments, and given the size and the crowded nature of the market these days, where do you think the opportunity there is for your business in terms of innovation and sales?
Well, opportunities aren't just available. You actually have to go out and make your own opportunities. I'm pretty lucky in that my finishing business is able to support me, so I don't have to make a living building instruments. That gives me the freedom to build and grow my business and know that I'm not going to have to give it up because I don't earn enough money. So I'm making my opportunities just by staying in the business, working at it, building, making contacts, and knowing that I'm still going to receive, an income because my finishing business is paying me to do that. So I'm fortunate in that case. There are a lot of young guys who come away from luthier schools or private training or whatever, and they have to jump in and make money right away, or they're going to have to go do something else. And it's not easy. Breaking into this market is not an easy thing anymore.
Yeah, I want to talk about that in a little bit more depth in a couple of moments, but a couple of quick questions about the instruments. And I think that you said to me at one time that you're really kind of focused on basses, building basses. Now, I know you've built guitars, but is that the direction that you're focused on instrumentally at this point, or you have something different?
Yeah, basses is my focus. I'm a bass player. I'm still a gigging musician, although I don't do it as a living anymore. And I'm a bass player, so I love the bass. I love meeting bass players and sharing insights with them. And I love building instruments for bass players. So that is definitely my focus. I do build guitars as well, but I'd say on a percentage basis, it's probably 90% bass guitars and 10% regular guitars.
Sure. Well, that sounds like a good footing for you. Now on to something completely different. And in episode 1, in our questionable moments section, and down the road, we expect to get more questions coming in from listeners. But I kind of posed the question, both not only on the episode, but also on social media, about this idea if there's a bubble of sorts in the guitar business. And I got some interesting responses across the board, and we're going to try to highlight some of that stuff coming up. But I sense that you have some thoughts on this, Pat, and what would those be?
Well, I think the bubble has already occurred. I think that I see generally a distancing from stringed instruments and more towards electronic instruments, synthesizers, even to synthesize drums and sampling. I really think the bubble has happened. Now, I think part of it is that schools just aren't teaching kids music anymore. And I think that the iPad and the iPhone and game, handheld games and all that have distracted the younger generation away from learning an instrument and making music. I really support NAMM's effort to get political and promote making music in our political system. I really support that, because if we take all the instruments out of school and if the kids continue to play video games and connect with their iPods and iPhones, pretty soon music's going to go away.
Yeah, that's a big concern.
And I see that as a sad state. I really, it would make me very sad to know that music would be going away.
Yeah, it's really thinning out the pipeline for
it sure is.
For people coming through it, and I've seen that sentiment in different sources here and there, but it's great to have your perspective on it. I would tend to agree. I mean, certainly we live in a different world now. We have to adapt one way or the other to the changes that occur. And those people who do, carry on, and those people who flat out don't get the consequences. And, sometimes that ain't all that good. But
I read blogs, and I'm involved in a couple of forums where I watch and listen to what people say. And lately I've been seeing musicians who are in their 40s or 30s and 40s saying things like, for the first 10 years or 20 years of my musical playing, I played all by myself, and now that I'm playing with other people, I wish I had spent more time early on learning to play with other people, because there's nothing like that experience. And if all you're doing is sitting at home playing and practicing scales, yeah, you're going to get great. But when it comes time to interact with other musicians, it's a social skill that needs to be developed, and you can't do that in front of an iPad or an iPhone or your computer. GarageBand, you can download samples. You can make a complete recording and not know how to play an instrument or ever play with anyone else. And to me, it's not. I'm an old school kind of guy. It's just not the way music's made. You make music with other people, not by yourself.
Yeah, and I suppose that you'd get some, and I'm with you on that. I think we'd both get some pushback on that, especially for people who really support all of that new technology. And I'm not against technology. I mean, I've embraced it, and even though I started really in the old school world of media and whatnot, but it seems to me what you're hitting on is a situation that has enveloped our culture in the last 5 to 10 years, but especially in the last 5. And I see it on news programs and opinion shows and stuff like that are talking increasingly now about the use of the devices and social media. And even if we go past the music side of it, that whole scenario is kind of unfolding in our personal lives. We see a sort of a desocialization of people that are lacking social skills and are having more problems with depression and lots of stuff like that. I don't want to get too deep into that set of weeds, but I think it supports what you're saying in the music side completely.
Agreed. When I was growing up, we used to go and play outside, and we'd play football and baseball, stickball, and we'd put bands together, or we would practice together. That's not happening anymore, and I'm not saying that's terrible. I'm just saying if that's all there is, then we need to really rethink that. There needs to be more than just me by myself.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I'm not sure that we've ever been very successful in turning back the clock. That's probably not going to happen. But right. I think that if we can create the incentives to engage in some of those core practices, that understanding that we're in a new world, but how do we get people to engage again within the context of this new era that we live in? That's probably the challenge.
I think a good place to start would be bring music back into schools. It's a great socialization. It's a great way for people to work together, and it's a great way for, at least for a little while, for a student or a young adult to not be alone.
I agree with you completely. And I suspect that we probably need to be doing that sort of thing in other aspects of our societal structure right now, which might help to relieve some of the discord. I don't know that there's a magic solution for any of that, but I would certainly hope that this idea and others would come into the forefront. So let me, as we start to run low on time, let me just kind of ask you about, and you touched on it a little bit earlier, but where you think there are opportunities for folks coming into the business, young folks, in one way or the other, and what advice would you give them as they look to try to capture a little piece of the guitar world?
Well, I think that the first step is finding out if it really is your passion. And if it's something that you truly enjoy and love doing, then go to school, learn how to do it, go buy a cheap instrument and practice on that. Get yourself a $69 guitar, take it apart, and put it back together again, or try to make it better. Try to make this $69 guitar play like a $1,000 guitar. That's a great way to start. If you really find that you just love this and that you want to do it, there are plenty of schools out there that can teach you the skills that can take you to the next level. Find a job in a company that makes musical instruments. Work your way up. Show that you have the desire and the skills to go farther. And then if your dream is to own your own business, realize it's not going to be easy, and you're going to have to put a lot of time in. Sometimes you're going to have to work way past wanting to leave and go home. And it's not an easy thing to do, but if you love it, it becomes something that you want to do anyway.
Well, it seems like I know from my own experience and from what I've heard from other people, when you are doing something that you really love, and especially when there's a little bit of a creative process involved, it also kind of becomes not work, and also time just kind of evaporates, especially for creative people or anybody that's doing something that has a creative component to it. Time just evaporates, and that's not a bad thing. We just, you have to look at the clock every once in a while, but if you don't, you'll be surprised when you look up and see, wow, 6 hours just went by and you had no idea. So I think that's...
Jeff, I've been in this business for 40 years now, and I still love what I do. So I know without a doubt that I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing.
And as a result, I would argue, or not argue, but I would certainly defend the idea that you're going to live a lot longer. I firmly believe that, and I try to practice that every day, even though there are challenges at times. It's always a choice that we make as to how we see things. And, if we see things in a negative light, that's what we're going to attract. And if we see things in a positive light, that's what we're going to attract. So I think you're right on. You've had just a great career so far, and and not to be too cliche, but I'm pretty convinced you're not finished.
I'm not done. Nope. Not by a long shot.
Well, listen, Pat, thanks so much for coming on Guitar Business Radio with us. I really appreciate it, and I look forward to chatting with you again real soon.
Likewise. Looking forward to it, Jeff.
Thanks, Pat. So in episode 1, I spoke about something we use at Guitar PR in virtually every aspect of anything that even resembles something having to do with marketing and sales. I'm talking about the 3 C's, and like I said before, I don't know that this is original to me, but I do know that it works. Just to review, the 3 C's are simply capture the attention, convey the message, compel the action. I'm going to delve into each one of these areas one at a time over several episodes, and today I want to get into capturing the attention. Now, there's tons of stuff written about this topic and the others as well. Some of it is useful and interesting. In many cases, however, I find them to be overcomplicated. This is a condition I also mentioned in episode 1. I like simple, and I'm going to keep this as simple as possible. You're welcome to complicate it as much as you want, but I would always caution you to do so at your own peril. So what are the ways we get attention? I mean, in business. Again, I like sets of 3 where possible, and my 3 ways are visual, verbal, and written. Now, I've seen other folks list a whole litany of these things, but I would still suggest that they ultimately all roll up into just these 3 categories. So let's think in those terms for the moment. Whatever communication medium you're using, that's going to dictate the particular combination of these 3 methods. Similar to checking the boxes of the 3 C's, I said that in the last episode, we essentially do the same thing as we drill into each of these sub-methods. Now, this is an important part of the process. Get in the habit of checking the boxes. It's a simple way to improve your odds and increase your chances of success, whatever you're endeavoring to accomplish. And keep in mind, most of what I'm telling you here and now and later in this segment, even if it sounds like I'm talking about your business, many of these ideas are certainly applicable to other areas of your life. And this is because they're based on simple principles that come from the core. Something I talked about in the trailer for this show, which you can still listen to. I'm into these foundational things, and I'm afraid you're going to hear a lot of that. Now, let's talk a little bit about visual methods. On the creative side, I'm kind of an out-of-the-cage, slightly off-center thinker. When I'm developing imagery, I naturally tend to move toward, provocative, humorous, and often just purely emotional images. And these images may at times seem completely disconnected from the pitch, which is okay as long as you can quickly tie it together with a written or spoken element that's going to connect it to the message that you want to convey. We'll talk about messaging in another episode. But when I'm talking about visual methods, this includes static images, photos, video, anything you can see. Keep in mind, in most, not all, but most situations, there's very little time to make the connection and have any influence. Whatever the visual is, it's got to do its work fast. With the second method that I refer to as verbal, I would also add a slash in the word audio, simply because a piece of music or some great guitar playing, these may also be obvious attention grabbers. But this method can and does often stand alone, but it's typically used in conjunction with a visual component, most commonly as part of the attention process, and then ultimately in conveying the message. Finally, getting attention through written words. Usually, this is through headlining and subheads. From my vantage point, I use headlines much the same strategic way that I do with visual methods, except with an additional component that I think of just as reality. And I would describe that as a factual statement that is both powerful and engaging. Something like, ABC Medical announces cure for diabetes. That may not be of interest to you, but I can guarantee you for 30 million Americans, or I think about 400 million worldwide, that's going to get their attention and definitely draw them in to get the message. Okay, so that may seem like an extreme example, although I think it's coming, but that's often the best way to demonstrate the concept. There's not very much ambiguity in doing that. So clearly, I'm deliberately not going into greater detail on any of this stuff at this time. I think that would be overcomplicating things unnecessarily. But getting used to hearing about these fundamental ideas and simple methods will serve as part of your foundation for better marketing for your business, for your employment, or your professional activities now and down the road. In the next episode, I'll talk more about messaging, but in the meantime, stay positive, stay focused on the destination, and keep all the options open on how to get there. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you on episode 3. And that's it for this episode of Guitar Business Radio. Thanks for being with us. You can stay tuned and stay in touch at guitarbusinessradio.com.